We continue now with our first guest speaker, Professor Janice of Fournillier of Georgia State University. Professor Fournillier is a highly qualified and experienced educator holding a PhD in educational psychology, MA in education, certificate of interdisciplinary qualitative studies, diploma in language arts teaching, and a BA in English and Spanish. She specializes in qualitative research methodologies, cultural studies, teaching and learning practices in non-school and urban contexts.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion of which I'm happy to be a part. And first, I want to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to what I consider to be a very momentous occasion. That we are having a discussion on education for future, and the focus is on the youth. I am very aware that many scholars and educators in the field of economics, politics, history, education, what have you, have written a great deal about the issues related to our Caribbean education system, and specifically the inequities that exist. And I thank them for what they've written and for the knowledge that I've gained from reading what they have written. I bring to this discussion my experience as a Caribbean person who was educated in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago specifically, taught at all levels of the educational system in Trinidad and Tobago, worked with the Caribbean Examination Council, and did research on issues related to our education system, both the school and non-school context. The points I raise here are also informed by the ton of readings and studies that I've had access to, that my colleagues have conducted and so written so very, very in depth and well about. My goal, therefore, is to use that along with my experiences of the stratified system of education, and indeed, I believe it is and continues to be stratified. And not necessarily intending to critique the government actions or what they have not done, what they intend to do, their strategic plans or anything of the sort, or to generalize. Instead, my hope is that you will gain an understanding of my perspectives on the inherited stratified system of education, and the challenges of the goal of obtaining education for all. Hence my title, Education for All, Myth or Reality. I also want us to think about, are we respecting the rights of the child? And these include those who we have included in the discussion today, which is such a great idea. And are we providing youth with the kind of knowledge, information, and opportunities that they need? I think we should hold all of that in mind as we begin this discussion and reflection on where we are, or where we want to go, or where we should go, or where we would like to go. Ultimately, I believe this talk will create a platform on which the youth specifically can begin to fully participate in the reconceptualization of our education system that desperately needs their voices to be added to the conversation as we reimagine education for the future. At the same time, I want to remind us that if this has to happen, all the studies, all the work, all the strategies, the papers on education need to become part of the knowledge base provided for our youth so that they become partners in the true sense of the word, and they are better able to engage in the discussion on the future of our education.
Education, education, this is the foundation. Our rising population needs sound education to be recognized anywhere you go. Have your certificate to show, to enjoy any kind of happiness. Knowledge is the key to success. Children go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you won't catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't allow idle companions to lead you astray. To earn tomorrow, you got to learn today.
You might wonder, why Slinger Francisco, aka the Mighty Sparrows Calypso on Education, became one of the features of this talk. Well, yeah, this composition was created some 55 years ago, during the time some of our countries, for example, Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, were gaining political independence and charting the course for our countries. This meant that education needed to be attended to carefully, and it became a major institution that would propel our individual and collective development. However, I'm reminded by my patois-speaking grandmother and mother that plus c'est sa chose, plus c'est sa même chose. The more things change, the more they remain the same. And thus I believe Mighty Sparrows Calypso, one might say, is still relevant today, as we continue to view education as essential and important to our growth and development, regardless of the era. However, despite all the changes, it seems some things remain the same, and the inequities on which the education system was built seem ever present. The question then becomes, who better to look to for possibilities than the youth, who are the future of our nations? However, I argue, if we are to move the system forward, they need to be aware of the past, and in the Sankofa tradition, go back and fetch to move forward. So yes, we need to hear from our youth what for them are the barriers to inclusivity and equity, although some might argue that some of these youth are the ones who are not experiencing being excluded, and they may not even consider the system inequitable. I then say, what if and when they are the leaders? Would they like to see the situation change? And so, what really is the past that has informed where we are and where we seem to be unable to move from? So let's look at some of our inherited inequalities in the Caribbean education system. So we can start with, it's no secret that pre-emancipation education of the enslaved population was not encouraged, and there were limited opportunities for poor whites. When limited legacies were entrusted to provide education for poor whites, there were minimal opportunities for the enslaved population. As Coates put it so well, prior to emancipation in 1838, the notion of providing education for the African slaves met strong opposition from plantation owners, despite the efforts of many Christian missionaries seeking to provide religious education to convert enslaved Africans to Christianity. Friends, our Caribbean education system, indeed, we have to accept, has its roots in the plantation slave-based society that was characteristic of most of the colonial period. And indeed, if we are honest, in spite of the gains we have made, and indeed what we see still is the presence, especially in our secondary school selection process, of a kind of hierarchy, which does not, allow us to really have that goal of education for all, a quality education. Is it that this in itself is the source of the challenges that we face in terms of fairness and equity? So there has been expansion, but the investment does not seem to have resulted in equalization of opportunity. So there's access and there's opportunities, but what kind of opportunities? And as Miller so rightly put it, notwithstanding the impressive gains, as we see in the Caribbean Examination Council that has changed, and the curriculum that has changed, etc., and the expansion in terms of you can get a place, but what kind of place do you get? The goals of equity and equality of opportunity remain distant, for the majority of the Caribbean people, while the barriers of ethnicity, race, and class have been lowered, they have not been removed. And we see that in the work of Delisle and a lot of other scholars who have looked at the SEA and now the previous common entrance and the SEA exams, and have shown that a certain class of students or certain students who attend a certain type of school seem privileged to find spaces in some schools and not others. Others argue that it's not a simple task, but, well, according to Black Stalin, we can make it if we try a little harder. Is it as easy as trying harder, I ask? However, I think we need to give thought to the policies, a lot of the international policies, that in a way have contributed to the gains and some instances the inequities, because they come packaged very nicely, but some of the things in the package we probably didn't bargain for, and we have not realized how they affect the outcomes, and the intended and unintended outcomes are many. So we can start looking at the UNESCO Convention on the Rights of the Child. We could look at Education for All. We could look at the DACA Framework for Action. We could look at, more recently, the Features of Education Initiative. And all of these, in some way, I argue, contribute to what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and the outcomes. So we look at the rights of the child and we say, okay, we hope that in some way the access to the services such as education specifically and healthcare are equitable. So you have access, but what kind of access do you have? Are the rights of the child really being attended to? Or is it just, sugar-coated? Oh yeah, we're taking care of them. And then we have the DACA framework that revisits education for all policy, and it became a reaffirmation of the vision set out in this World Declaration of Education for All a decade ago. And it is true that a lot of our partners, or a lot of our Caribbean countries, have been participating in this framework and have used it to develop their strategic plans and to rethink to make their visions of for education, and used it. So we are participants in all of this. And even more interesting is the 2015 report, which showed that just 1/3 of countries have achieved all the measurable education for all goals. So it's not as perfect as we think it is. It's still a work in progress. And as we come to the new initiative, the Futures of Education initiative, which I think is even more important and really poignant at this point in time, where the goal is to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet. And if we exclude some from that, from, really accessing all the different types of knowledge and learning, then what are we doing? Where are their rights? And so it's important to know that the initiative incorporates extensive public and expert engagement and aims to catalyze a global debate on how education needs to be rethought in a world of increasing complexity, uncertainty, and fragility. So that's where we are now. But where are we going? And they added, we need a new social contract for education to repair injustices while transforming the future. And I think this is so relevant to the conference, because if we are looking to the future of education for the youth, what will this new social contract look like? Who will be participants in this contractual framework? How are we going to repair the injustices and a lot of the things the unjust things, the inequities that we see in the selection processes? I want to make a case for bringing the students and giving power, allowing that power and student voice to be integral. So we get what the laws are, what the contracts are, we get what the governments do, what the educators do, but where's the student voice? I'm not saying totally have them tell us what to do, but can we put them in the middle? Can we start to look in the middle? Can we see things in the middle? Can we shift the established boundaries that we have created between teacher and student and student, institutional knowledge and student knowledge? And I add to that local knowledge too, right? And so if we are to really go back to this whole contract about, oh, no, we have to do something about the injustices, how do we do that? I want to thank Didacus Jules for some of his important suggestions for successful reform. And he points to they should be strategic and sustainable, ongoing and thorough, involve stakeholders and create new partnerships for progress. And that's where I come to the point that, can we bring the student voice into the partnership process? Can we make sure that they are there too? But in doing so, are we providing them with the local and global knowledge needed to be able to make the decisions that we would like to hear from them? And so I come back again to my own dear Dr. Leroy Calise, sorry. We can make it. And so I close with the words of our ancestor, Brother C.L.R. James, who in 1980 said, when others doubted, I have never found the West Indians, when called upon in a critical situation, do not respond. That is their life. I believe they can't help responding. Beginning as we do in a new civilization and leaving such elements that might have been brought with them behind, they have always responded to a fundamental and serious challenge. That is our way of life. That is why we are still alive. Thank you.
Sure, if you're still there, do we have any questions for our last presenter? Any questions or comments?